My mother stood at the altar, wearing white, while I sat alone, holding the divorce papers she once encouraged me to sign. Now she calls me jealous, but she has no idea what I'm about to do. You ever see something so vile, so out of place in the universe, that it makes you question if reality is just a cruel joke? That's what it felt like the day I opened the envelope. It wasn't fancy, just a plain cream card, no lace, no flair. Inside, in embossed black letters, was the announcement: "We are pleased to invite you to celebrate the union of Elaine Harper and Richard Caldwell. My mother. My ex-husband. Getting married. To each other." I didn't even know whether to laugh or scream. Elaine Harper wasn't just my mother, she was the woman I used to call my best friend. The one who held my hand when I cried about Richard's lies. The one who told me to leave him, who whispered, "You deserve better, sweetie," while pouring me tea in the kitchen. And Richard, my manipulative, narcissistic, gaslighting ex-husband, he was the man I finally escaped after 6 years of walking on eggshells, pretending to be happy while dying inside. And now they were together? I didn't RSVP. I didn't attend. But I saw the pictures. Oh yes, Facebook made sure I didn't miss a thing. My mother in ivory lace, a pearl comb in her silver blonde hair. Richard in a navy blue tux, the same smirk on his face that I'd once mistaken for charm. And the caption, written by my own mother, read, "Found love in the most unexpected place. Don't let bitterness steal your blessings." That last line? That was for me. I knew it. The comments from family and friends followed like knives. "You look radiant, Elaine. You two are perfect for each other. Ignore the jealous ones." Jealous. That's what they were calling me now. A jealous daughter. Bitter. Unstable. Still not over Richard, my Aunt Gina whispered to my cousin, who then whispered it to me. The entire narrative had been flipped, and I was the villain in a story I didn't write. No one asked how I felt. No one asked if I was okay. And maybe that's when the seed of revenge was planted. Not out of jealousy, but out of justice. I didn't want Richard back. I didn't want my mother's approval. I wanted them exposed. For what they were. For what they did. And I was willing to wait. To watch. To build. Because revenge, if it's going to mean anything, needs patience. And I had time. 2 weeks after their wedding, my mother called. Not to apologize. Not to ask if I was okay. She called to invite me to a family dinner at her house. "It's just a little something for your stepfather's birthday," she said like the words didn't taste like poison. Stepfather. I could barely form a reply, but she didn't notice. Or she didn't care. "I'm making his favorite. Prime rib. You should come, honey. It'll be good to move forward." Move forward, she said. After she married the man I had to peel off my life like a leech. The man who used to track my spending, criticize my clothes, tell me I was lucky he stayed when I cried after losing a pregnancy. But I said yes. Not because I wanted to be there, but because revenge needs recon. I needed to look them in the eye and remind them I wasn't broken. I wore black. A sharp dress with clean lines. Hair pinned tight, makeup flawless. Not sexy. Not loud. Just strong. Cold. I walked into that house like a guest walking into a crime scene, scanning every photo frame on the walls. Half of them were still from when Richard was married to me. Except now my mother stood in those frames beside him. She didn't even bother to replace them. The dining room was full, cousins, neighbors, family friends. Richard played the charming host, his arm around my mother like she was a prize. She smiled too hard. Wore pearls I knew were once mine. And I just sat there, pretending to sip wine while watching it all. That's when she said it. Loud enough for everyone to hear. "You know," she giggled, "I always thought if I were younger, I'd steal him for myself." Guess dreams do come true, huh? The table laughed. Richard laughed. Someone even clapped. And I smiled. Smiled so wide I thought my face might crack. Because if I opened my mouth, I would scream. After dessert, while everyone lingered in the living room, I slipped into the den. Their office. I knew that room well, same filing cabinet, same desk, same safe in the wall behind the curtain. But now it was filled with new folders. New insurance policies. New joint accounts. I didn't take anything. I didn't need to. I just memorized. Every number. Every name. Every detail. Because that dinner didn't burn me, it forged me. On the way out, Richard hugged me. His breath warm against my ear as he whispered, "You'll always be part of this family, whether you like it or not." And my mother? She stood behind him, smiling like she'd won something. But they didn't win. They woke something. I didn't sleep the night after that dinner. I lay in bed with my mind racing like a crime scene investigator, rewinding voices, recalling glances, piecing together the trail. There was one moment I kept circling back to, a file in the office labeled Revised Trust, Harper Caldwell. My mother's maiden name, and Richard's last name, hyphenated. As if I'd never existed. As if they were now the legacy. The heirs. The history. It made my skin crawl. By morning, I was in my car, driving across town to the one person I knew could help me think like them, James Whitman. My old divorce attorney. A clean-cut, sharp-tongued man who never sugar-coated anything. He'd once told me I was lucky to get out when I did, that Richard was the kind of man who'd trap you in paperwork before you realized he'd stolen your freedom. James hadn't heard from me in over a year, but the moment he saw me walk into his office, he stood up. "What's wrong?" he asked. "You look like you've seen a ghost." "Worse," I said. "I saw my mother kiss my ex-husband on the mouth and call it marriage." He blinked once. Then again. "You're joking." I slid the invitation across the desk. "Do I look like I'm joking?" We talked for hours. I told him everything. From the wedding announcement to the dinner, to the trust file I spotted. James rubbed his temples the entire time. "If they've merged assets, your name is nowhere. And if she's added him to her will, it could wipe out any inheritance that was once meant for you." "I don't care about the money," I said. "Yes, you do," he replied. "Not because of greed. But because it's what they think they took from you. And that's the thread we pull." That day, James filed a few quiet requests. Property records. Financial updates. Real estate holdings. Nothing invasive. Nothing illegal. Just access points. We were gathering dots. And soon, I would start connecting them. But the twist came later that night, when James texted me, "Call me. Urgent." I did. And what he said sent a new kind of chill down my spine. "There's a joint life insurance policy," he said. "Filed just last month. With your mother as the primary. And Richard as the beneficiary." I froze. "If she dies, everything goes to him." I didn't speak. I couldn't. He said, "Do you trust him with her life?" And for the first time since they got married, I realized, this wasn't just about betrayal anymore. It was about danger. I started visiting more after that call. Not because I missed my mother. But because if Richard was planning something, if there was even a sliver of darkness hiding behind his charm, I needed to see it with my own eyes. The strange thing was, my mother welcomed me. Eagerly. As if nothing had ever been broken between us. "Come for tea, sweetheart," she'd say. "It's so nice to see you smiling again." I wasn't smiling. I was watching. Their home felt colder now. It was the same house I grew up in, the same garden she used to trim with bare hands and a floppy straw hat, but now everything was curated, stiff, sterile. Richard had reorganized the bookshelves, moved family photos out of the hallway, and installed a ridiculous security system. I watched my mother swallow it all like a child desperate to please. That was the first crack in her armor, how small she looked next to him. Not just in size, but in voice, in presence. My mother was once a woman who held her own. But now she waited for his cues, laughed after his punchlines, blinked twice before answering anything. One afternoon, while she was folding laundry, I slipped into their bedroom. Just 5 minutes. That's all I needed. The top drawer of her nightstand was too clean. Too organized. A bottle of sleeping pills lay right on top. Zolpidem. Prescribed. Recent. I took a picture. The refill date didn't match her story. She said she hadn't needed help sleeping in months. But someone was taking them. Too many of them. Next to the bottle was a folded napkin with handwriting I recognized instantly, his. Richard's. Just take one more. You need rest. You're always so tired. Trust me. My heart thundered. That night, I sat in my car across the street and watched their upstairs lights flicker out around 10:30 p.m. I waited. At 11:02, I saw a figure move in the hallway, tall, masculine. Richard. He was in her room. Again. I couldn't see what he was doing, but I knew. Something about it chilled me deeper than any betrayal. He wasn't just sleeping beside her. He was watching her. Controlling her. Slowly erasing her. The next morning, I called James. We may need more than paperwork, I told him. We may need surveillance. He didn't question it. He just said, I'll get you what you need. Because this was no longer just about justice. It was about saving my mother, from the man she married, and from the version of herself that thought it was love. The attic was the only place untouched by Richard. That's why I went there. One rainy Saturday, I told my mother I'd help sort the old boxes she'd been meaning to clean out for years. She smiled like it was nothing, like I was finally softening. But inside, I was boiling. Every kind smile I gave was a blade hidden in plain sight. I followed the creaky steps up to the attic alone, flashlight in one hand, gloves on the other, and started opening every box labeled with her handwriting. Christmas ornaments. Baby clothes. A box of mine labeled college junk. And then, at the very bottom of a plastic tub filled with faded scarves and broken photo frames, I found something wrapped in an old cardigan, a leather-bound diary, tied shut with a faded blue ribbon. I don't know why I felt afraid opening it. Maybe because it felt like trespassing into her heart. But I wasn't here to respect her privacy anymore. That ended the moment she said I do to the man who once bruised my ribs and told me it was my fault for making him angry. The diary wasn't old. Not childhood memories or young girl poems. The entries were dated just 2 years before the wedding. Her handwriting was messy. Erratic. Some pages had tears smudging the ink. And as I read, the air seemed to grow heavier. He tells me I'm beautiful, even when I feel ancient. He listens when I cry about my daughter. He makes me feel wanted again. I stopped. Read that part again. When I first met him, I told myself it was wrong. But he came over to fix the sink. She wasn't home. We just talked. And suddenly I wasn't a mother, I was a woman again. My hands trembled. I flipped forward. She thinks I'm her protector, but she has no idea what I've done. What we've done. He said we were meant for each other, that she never appreciated him. And maybe she didn't. Maybe I deserve this. I had to sit down. My legs gave out. This wasn't a sudden betrayal. It had been years in the making. They didn't fall in love after my divorce. My mother had been involved while I was still married. She listened to me cry about him at the kitchen table, then went and laid in his bed. The air in the attic felt like fire. I couldn't breathe. I couldn't scream. All I could do was sit in the dust and let the words carve themselves into my bones. When I finally climbed down, I didn't take the diary. I didn't need to. I had photos of every page. I walked into the kitchen and looked her straight in the eyes as she poured tea. "You ever think of writing again, Mom?" I asked. "Like journaling?" She blinked, then smiled. "Oh, those silly old habits? I haven't kept a diary in years." "Liar." I smiled back. "Shame. Some stories are worth remembering. And some deserve to be exposed. Sometimes, when you're chasing the truth, you find it hiding in the most ordinary places, like through the blinds of a nosy neighbor's window." Her name was Clara Dempsey. 81 years old. Lived next door to my mother since I was a child. Back then, she used to give me cookies and cough drops and scold me if I walked barefoot on the porch. But now? Now she was my best chance at seeing what happened when I wasn't around. Clara called it her hobby, watching life unfold from her upstairs window, taking photographs of birds, squirrels, and whatever drama her neighbors unknowingly fed her. She had an entire wall of labeled thumb drives, birthdays, holidays. That one summer my mother's grill caught fire. All of it, organized by year. And all of it filmed from a distance, quiet, steady, without interference. Like a human surveillance drone. I brought her tulips and coffee cake that morning, and we chatted like old times. Then I asked, carefully, "Have you taken any photos of my mom lately? Her and Richard?" She hesitated. "What's this about, sweetheart?" "Just curiosity," I said. "There's been a lot of gossip. I just want to know what's real." Clara squinted at me like she could smell the lie. Then she nodded. "Come with me." Her living room turned into a small command center. She inserted a flash drive into her television. Clicked through folders. Labeled by dates. Clicked again. And there they were. Richard. Yelling at my mother by the garden fence. Richard storming out of the garage at midnight. Richard grabbing her wrist, too tight, too harsh, and my mother flinching. The photos weren't blurry. They weren't up for debate. They were time-stamped, clean, and damning. "She told me they were just arguing over tomatoes," Clara said, voice thin. But I knew that look. "That's not about vegetables." I asked if I could have copies. Clara nodded slowly. "You always had fire in your belly," she said. "Don't let them put it out again." I walked away with a USB drive full of evidence. But it wasn't just about abuse anymore. It was about pattern. It was about history repeating itself, first with me, now with her. And this time, I wasn't going to let silence protect the guilty. Later that evening, I called James. "We're ready to move," I told him. "Not in court. Not yet. But I want them to feel it. Publicly." "How public?" he asked. "Enough to make them sweat," I said. We drafted an anonymous tip. With timestamps. Photos. Excerpts from her diary. Nothing tied to me, yet. Just enough to create a crack. To whisper a story into the community. That something wasn't right in the Harper Caldwell house. That maybe this love wasn't so pure after all. And once gossip takes root in a town like ours, it spreads faster than wildfire. The first public blow didn't come through lawsuits or headlines. It came in the form of a sideways glance across a pew at Sunday service. That's how things spread in our town, not through social media storms or tabloid exposés, but through lace gloves, hymn books, and whispers that start with, "Bless her heart, but did you hear?" That morning, my mother wore a lavender dress with a pearl brooch. Richard walked beside her like a proud king dragging his trophy through town. They were seated one row ahead of me, unaware I was there. I hadn't been to church in months, but I showed up for this moment. I needed to see it with my own eyes, the look on her face when the world stopped applauding. It happened after the sermon, during the fellowship hour in the church garden. That's when the whispers found her. I watched as two women from the Ladies' Outreach Committee approached her with forced smiles and curious eyes. "Elaine, dear, I hope everything's all right at home," one of them asked. "Of course," my mother replied, her laugh too high-pitched, her hands tightening around the styrofoam coffee cup. Why wouldn't it be? They glanced at each other. No reason. Just, you seem a little tired lately. We all do at our age. Stress can sneak up, can't it? She was too proud to ask what they'd heard. That would have confirmed everything. But I saw her fingers tremble. Richard was off chatting with the pastor, oblivious. Or pretending to be. The photos had done their work. The anonymous email, sent to the church board and a handful of local clubs, had included just enough: a grainy still of Richard gripping her wrist, a time-stamped image of her standing barefoot outside in the rain, staring blankly at the driveway. A brief message: someone should check on Elaine Harper. Not all marriages are what they seem. I didn't sign it. I didn't need to. By Tuesday, her garden club meeting was cancelled. By Friday, someone had tagged her house with the word whore in pink sidewalk chalk, not spray paint, not permanent, just enough to humiliate. And I knew exactly who did it: a teenage girl named Tara, whose mother Richard had once insulted publicly at a fundraiser when they were still married to me. People remember cruelty. Especially when it changes clothes and walks back into town wearing pearls and a wedding band. The following weekend, my mother didn't show up to brunch with her bridge group. Her absence was louder than any confession. And that night, when I drove by their house, I saw the curtains drawn tight for the first time in years. No light. No laughter. Just silence and shadows. I parked down the street and watched. Sometimes revenge doesn't need explosions. Sometimes it begins with whispers. And sometimes, that's enough to make the guilty beg for quiet. It started as a rumor, then a murmur, and by week's end, it was a storm. My mother stopped answering calls. Richard deactivated his Facebook. The man who once posted daily inspirational quotes was now silent, hiding behind drawn curtains and locked gates. And then came the bruise. Clara texted me on a Wednesday morning. She came out to get the mail. "You need to see this." I rushed over. Parked 2 houses down. From across the street, I watched my mother in her robe, shuffling toward the mailbox. She moved slower now. Like every step cost her. And then she turned, and I saw it. A purplish shadow blooming across her cheekbone. It wasn't an accident. It wasn't subtle. It was deliberate. High enough to be visible, low enough to be deniable. My stomach turned. For a moment, I couldn't breathe. I texted James, "We're there. It's happening. What's next?" His reply was swift: "Get her to a doctor. Get photos. We file a protection petition anonymously. Then we go to court." But getting my mother to admit the truth was like trying to light wet wood. That afternoon, I showed up with soup and the softest voice I could muster. She didn't meet my eyes when she opened the door. Her robe was changed, and her makeup was heavy, but not heavy enough. "You hungry?" I asked. "No," she whispered. "Just tired." We sat in the kitchen. Same table where she once told me Richard was just lost, that I wasn't trying hard enough. I stirred my spoon slowly. Watched her hands tremble around the mug. I waited until her guard softened, until I saw the glint of fear in her eyes. "What happened to your face?" I asked gently. She froze. Then forced a smile that didn't touch her eyes. "I fell." "Stupid, really." I bumped the cabinet door. I nodded slowly. "Funny. That cabinet's always been below eye level." Her smile cracked. She looked away. "Mom," I said. "I know. I know what this is. You don't have to lie." But she did. Again. And again. And finally, she whispered, "You're just trying to make me hate him, because you still haven't forgiven us." That sentence broke something in me. Not because it hurt. But because it proved how far gone she was. How deep she'd sunk into the story they'd created, that I was bitter, jealous, delusional. That I was the villain haunting their perfect life. I didn't argue. I didn't cry. I just leaned in close and said, "You may love him, but I survived him. And I'm not going to let him finish what he started. Not with you." She didn't respond. But when I left, she followed me to the door. Her hand lingered on the frame. And her eyes, though still frightened, were wet. There was something left in her. A flicker. And I was going to bring it back, even if I had to burn everything else down to do it. The judge didn't need a long explanation. The photos Clara had taken, paired with the diary entries and James's meticulous packet of evidence, were more than enough to raise concern. It wasn't a full restraining order. Not yet. But it was a preliminary injunction for wellness verification. In simple terms, the court had the right to question Richard. To monitor. To dig. And Richard hated being watched more than anything. The papers were delivered on a Monday morning by a neutral officer. Not dramatic. Not loud. Just a cold envelope handed over at the front gate with a signature required and a "Have a good day, sir." That was enough. Enough to ruin Richard's illusion of control. I know because James called me 2 hours later. He called me, James said, tone sharp. Said he knows this is your doing. I smiled to myself. Good. He's nervous. Which means he's dangerous now. You need to be careful. That afternoon, I drove past their house, not to gloat, not to celebrate, but to check. The lawn hadn't been mowed. The blinds were closed. And on the porch sat the same styrofoam cup of coffee my mother had taken outside days earlier. Untouched. Cold. A little mold had begun to form at the rim. Inside that house was a storm brewing. And I could feel the wind shifting. Later that night, Clara called. He was screaming in the driveway. Calling someone. Slamming the car door. Left in a fury. Was she with him? I asked. No. She stayed inside. Just stood in the window. Watching. Watching. Just like me. 2 days later, my mother called. For the first time in weeks, she called me. Her voice was small. Can we talk? She asked. I met her at the park. Neutral ground. She wore sunglasses, though the day was cloudy. I didn't press. I sat on the bench and waited while she gathered herself. I don't know what's happening, she whispered. But, ever since those papers came, he's been different. Paranoid. Mean. Worse than I've ever seen him. I said nothing. Let her speak. I think he thinks I sent them, she said, glancing at me. I didn't. Did I? No, I said. But I wish you had. She looked down. I don't know how I ended up here. I thought he loved me. He made me feel seen again. After so many years of feeling invisible. And now? I asked. She swallowed hard. Now I feel like I'm drowning, and he's holding my head underwater. There it was. The flicker. Turning to flame. I placed my hand over hers. Let me help you. Let me fix what I couldn't before. She nodded, barely. But it was enough. That night, I sent James a message, she's ready. Because once a victim starts speaking, the abuser's days are numbered. They had invited 6 people. Old friends. Couples who had once double-dated with Richard and me back when my marriage still limped along behind closed doors. My mother's idea, apparently, one last attempt to convince everyone that their marriage was strong, that the recent church whispers were just gossip. But I knew what Richard really wanted, to control the narrative. To smile through clenched teeth, pour expensive wine, and paint over the rot in the walls with forced laughter and steak dinners. I wasn't invited. But I didn't need to be. Because one of the dinner guests was a quiet woman named Marcy Brighton. Soft-spoken, beige cardigans, married to Richard's old law school buddy. But she was also my silent ally. She'd once pulled me aside at a gala, years ago, and whispered, I know what he's like. You don't need to explain yourself to anyone. We hadn't spoken since. Until now. I asked her to observe. Just observe. Record if she could. What she captured was gold. The night began smoothly, white wine on the patio, laughter that sounded just a touch too loud. My mother sat beside Richard, stiff and smiling, her wrists tucked beneath the tablecloth. But somewhere between the main course and dessert, something shifted. A simple comment. Marcy's husband said something about church. About the whispers. About how brutal people can be. And Richard snapped. Maybe people should mind their goddamn business, he said, loud enough to kill the conversation. Forks froze. Glasses trembled slightly in hands. My mother tried to soothe him with a touch to his arm, but he jerked away from her like she'd burned him. Do you people really think you know us? He hissed. You see a photo and suddenly you're saints? You read an anonymous message and become crusaders for women you barely speak to? No one replied. He stood. Knocked over a wine glass. The red spilled like blood across the white tablecloth. Marcy told me later that the silence was suffocating. My mother said nothing the entire time. Not once. She just stared ahead like she wasn't even there. The guests left early. No dessert. No goodbyes. Just an exit drenched in tension. The next day, Clara told me 2 police cars had pulled up to the house around noon. Not for violence. Not yet. But for a welfare check. Richard opened the door, calm and composed, told them it was just stress, that his wife had the flu and needed rest. They left after 10 minutes. But I knew the clock had started ticking. Richard had lost the crowd. And once the mask slips in public, it never goes back on the same. The next time I called my mother, she didn't answer. That wasn't unusual, she often let calls go to voicemail when she didn't want to talk. But when she didn't call back by the next day, I felt it deep in my gut, something was wrong. I drove over without calling. Clara met me on the sidewalk. Her lips were tight. He hasn't let her outside in days, she whispered. I've seen him take out the trash. Go for groceries. But her? Nothing. Curtains never open. No lights upstairs at night. I rang the bell. No answer. I knocked. Waited. Knocked again. Finally, Richard opened the door, half an inch, chain still on. She's sick, he said through clenched teeth. Sleeping. We don't need company. Let me see her. She's fine. I'll call the police. He smiled. That smug, slow smile that used to make my skin crawl. And tell them what? That a grown woman doesn't want to talk to her daughter? Go ahead. He shut the door. But I had already caught a glimpse behind him, of her slipper on the floor in the hallway. Just one. Upside down. That night, I didn't sleep. Neither did James. He drafted a motion for emergency intervention. Based on psychological coercion, isolation, and potential elder abuse. We had the photos. The diary. The neighbors' statements. And now, the final straw, a wellness report from a private nurse I had sent over the week before. Richard had refused her entry, claiming they were out of town. That was enough. But court takes time. Hours stretch into days when someone you love is behind locked doors. On the 3rd morning, Clara called again. She opened the window. What? I saw her. Upstairs. She cracked the window open, just an inch. Long enough to throw something out. It was a folded note. I raced over. Clara had it in a sandwich bag. The handwriting was shaky, but it was hers. He took my phone. Says I'm confused. Says I imagined the bruises. I didn't. I'm not safe. Please help me. Mom, that note was all I needed. I sent it to James. By sundown, we had a judge's signature. By midnight, officers stood outside the house with flashlights and calm but firm voices. Richard tried to argue. Said she was just tired. Said this was harassment by an angry daughter. They ignored him. They found her upstairs. In bed. Makeup on. Like she had tried to make herself look presentable, for them. For me. For someone who might still see her as human. When they asked if she wanted to leave, she whispered, yes. And that was the first real word she had said in weeks. She left the house wrapped in a coat that wasn't hers, holding a purse that shook in her hands. I met her at the shelter. She didn't cry. She didn't speak. She just sat beside me, our hands touching on the bench, as the reality of freedom began to settle into her skin. And Richard? He was left alone in that perfect little house. With no one to perform for anymore. Richard didn't go quiet. Of course he didn't. 3 days after my mother left the house and was placed under temporary protection, he took to the one weapon he had left, his voice. A local podcast, run by a sleazy, gossip-hungry man named Alan Greevy, aired an emergency sit-down with Richard Caldwell. I found it by accident. My friend Lily texted me a link and 3 shocked emojis. The title made my stomach flip. Accused husband breaks his silence, betrayed by my ex-wife's jealous daughter. I listened. And every word felt like poison dripped directly into the public's ear. She's unstable, Richard said, calm and collected. My wife, Elaine, is recovering from a nervous breakdown. And her daughter, bless her heart, has always had issues. Resentment. She never accepted our marriage. She's weaponized the system to punish us. To punish her own mother. Alan Greevy's greasy voice chimed in, so you're saying this is personal? Richard chuckled. It's always been personal. But she crossed a line. She's manipulating my wife's mental health, trying to convince people we're abusive. It's tragic. Sad, really. There it was. The counterattack. He was turning it into a narrative, painting me as the jealous daughter, my mother as mentally ill, and himself as the noble husband caught in the crossfire. But what he didn't know was that while he sat behind a mic spinning lies, the truth was already being prepared behind closed doors. James had compiled a formal case. And my mother, though fragile, still healing, had agreed to give a sworn statement. Her voice shook as she spoke, but she never wavered. She recounted the gaslighting. The isolation. The pills. The bruises. And worst of all, the things she didn't want to admit, the way he spoke to her when no one was around, how he called her used up, old baggage, how he compared her to me, and not in flattering ways. He would say, your daughter was too stubborn, but you'll obey. That sentence stayed with me for days. But her statement was airtight. And it was enough to push our case forward, to file not just for protection, but for public exposure. The next morning, James leaked a transcript of her deposition, redacted for privacy, but unmistakably damning. He didn't send it to gossip blogs. He sent it to the church council. The Garden Society. The Ladies' Historical Club. And Clara. Within 48 hours, Richard's podcast interview was met with silence, not applause. No one reposted it. No one defended him. And someone, anonymous, tagged his car in the grocery store parking lot with pink lipstick. We believe her. I visited my mother that night. She was sitting on the couch, wrapped in a blanket, holding a cup of tea like it was an anchor. He's losing, she whispered. Isn't he? I nodded. Yes. And this time, it's not because I'm jealous. It's because I'm right. There's something about a courtroom that strips people down to their core. No decor. No applause. No podcast microphones. Just cold seats, sharp questions, and the suffocating weight of truth. It was Richard's first hearing, a mandatory response to the protective petition we had filed on my mother's behalf. Not criminal. Not yet. But serious enough that the judge requested presence. Sworn statements. Eyes on the accused. I was there, seated quietly behind our attorney, notebook in hand, face still. Richard arrived in a charcoal gray suit, smug as ever, flashing tight smiles to anyone who made eye contact. He even nodded at me. Like we were co-stars in a drama he still thought he controlled. My mother entered 10 minutes later, with a social worker on one side and James on the other. She didn't look like the woman who used to hum over stovetops or wear roses in her hair. She looked older, lighter, and finally unafraid. When the judge asked her if she felt safe returning to the home, her voice cracked, but didn't break. "No, Your Honor. I don't feel safe, and I haven't felt safe for a long time." Then it was Richard's turn. He stood, raised his right hand, promised to tell the truth, and lied. He called my mother fragile. Said she was easily confused. Said I had poisoned her mind because I never accepted their marriage. He brought up my childhood tantrums, my history of therapy, and even alluded to my divorce as if he hadn't been the reason behind it. "I married Elaine out of love," he said. "But her daughter couldn't stand that I moved on. It took everything in me not to stand and shout. But I didn't. Because truth doesn't always scream. Sometimes it waits." James stood next. Calm. Unflinching. He presented the evidence, the diary pages, Clara's time-stamped photos. The voice recording my mother had taken the week before she left, Richard's voice whispering, "Take the pill. I don't care if you're tired. You're quieter that way." Gasps fluttered through the courtroom. Richard's face changed. Only slightly. But it changed. The mask flickered. The hands tightened. The judge didn't make a ruling that day. But she didn't need to. Her expression said enough. "We will continue this investigation under emergency status," she said. "Ms. Harper is to remain in protected care. Mr. Caldwell is ordered to maintain distance, with zero direct contact." Richard tried to argue, but the judge shut him down with a single look. "This is not a debate, Mr. Caldwell. This is a warning." Outside the courtroom, reporters were already gathering. Clara had tipped off a journalist she trusted. Just one. Not for scandal. For truth. My mother and I sat on the courthouse steps, side by side. She looked at me. I kept wondering when this would all feel real. "And now?" I asked. She exhaled slowly. "Now I finally believe myself." Sometimes, that's all justice is, a moment where the world stops questioning your pain, and starts listening. It aired on a Tuesday morning, right before the lunch hour, when the town was just settling into its quiet hum. A local news anchor named Denise Carter had covered everything from county fairs to political scandals, but never something so personal. So raw. The story title crawled across the screen: "Former Councilman Richard Caldwell under investigation for elder coercion and psychological abuse." There he was, on screen in black and white, walking into court beside his lawyer, hands shoved in his pockets like he was on his way to a golf tournament. The article quoted from the transcript of my mother's deposition. They blurred her name, but everyone in this town knew. Everyone. The piece didn't editorialize. It just laid out the facts: a rapid marriage to the mother of his ex-wife. A string of documented injuries. The diary. The audio. The court order. The neighbor's statements. The accusation of controlling prescriptions. By 1:30 p.m., it was on the local news Facebook page. By 3 p.m., it had over 7,000 comments. By dinner, Richard Caldwell was no longer the man people waved at in the grocery store. He was the man they whispered about, stared at, avoided. That night, he called me. From a blocked number. I let it go to voicemail. I didn't want to hear his voice again, but I saved the message anyway. His tone was low, trembling, barely restrained. "You think you've won, don't you?" he said. "But this isn't over. You're destroying your own mother." "For what? For revenge? You always were jealous." Of me. Of her. Of everything. He laughed bitterly. You want to know the truth? She was already mine long before the wedding. You lost her years ago. Click. I sat there, holding the phone like it was a live wire. Not because it hurt. Because he had just admitted it, on tape. That night, I sent the recording to James. He responded 2 minutes later. That's intimidation. And a confession. I'm filing it first thing in the morning. The next day, Richard tried to do damage control. He contacted another podcast, one more legitimate than the last, and offered an exclusive interview to set the record straight. But this time, the journalist didn't give him the script. She asked real questions. Pressed him about the bruise. The recording. The diary. The missing weeks where my mother wasn't seen. Richard tried to charm his way through it, but the cracks were visible. His hands trembled. He fumbled a date. He stammered when asked if he had ever physically touched her in anger. The interview ended with a line he hadn't planned. A slip. She was confused, okay? She thought I was like her daughter, too rough, too cold. But I'm not. I just needed her to listen. That was it. The clip was pulled, cut, shared, and spread like wildfire. It trended locally for 2 days straight. By Friday, his lawyer filed for temporary withdrawal from representation. By Sunday, protesters stood across the street from his house with signs. My favorite one? Love isn't control. I showed it to my mother. She didn't smile, but she reached for my hand and whispered, "He's slipping." And I nodded. Yes, Mom. But you're not. You're rising. The email came at 2:17 a.m. I wasn't asleep. I hadn't been sleeping well since the court dates began stacking up and Richard's face kept appearing on every news screen and phone notification. My mother was sleeping in the guest room at my place by then. She'd grown quieter, not broken, but inward. The way someone sounds when they're rebuilding their soul, brick by brick. I opened the email on my phone. It read, subject, "You don't know me, but I knew him." Message, "My name is Elena Dorrance. I dated Richard. Years ago. I was just 23. I saw your name in the article. I didn't know who to contact. But I believe you. I know what he's like. He almost ruined me too. Please, can we talk?" I stared at it for a long time. Her name didn't ring a bell. But I replied with one word, yes. The call came the next afternoon. Elena's voice trembled through the receiver like it was still 1997 and she was still trying to wake up from a nightmare. She told me she had worked under Richard during one of his early business ventures, back when he was married to his first wife, before me, before the polished suits and charity speeches. She was a marketing intern. Barely out of college. He took an interest in me, she said. Called me brilliant. Promoted me fast. I didn't see it for what it was. I thought it was real. I thought he loved me. But what started as mentoring quickly turned to manipulation. He isolated her from coworkers. Kept her late under the pretense of private strategy sessions. When she tried to pull away, he threatened to ruin her career. Said he'd blacklist her, expose intimate texts, make sure she never worked in the city again. One night, she tried to leave after a late meeting. He blocked the door. He didn't hit me, she whispered. But I thought he might. The look in his eyes, cold. Like I wasn't even human anymore. I quit the next morning. Moved out of state. She never told anyone. Until now. I asked her, gently, why now? Because, she said, I saw your mother's face on the news. And it was my face. The same look. Like someone who's been disappeared while still breathing. I thanked her. Then I asked if she'd testify. She went quiet. I don't want to be in the news, she said. I have a family now. A daughter. I just. I needed to say it out loud. That you're not crazy. That he's not a victim. We hung up, and I sat in my kitchen with the lights off, staring out into the garden where my mother had planted lilies the day before, something about starting fresh. The flowers looked too delicate for the kind of storm we were in. But maybe that's the point. Delicate things can survive hurricanes, if their roots run deep. I forwarded the email to James. He replied immediately, "She doesn't need to testify. Just the written account helps." Her silence ends here. And in that moment, I realized we weren't just taking down Richard. We were unearthing him. Layer by layer. Victim by victim. And when the last one steps into the light, he'll have nowhere left to hide. If there's one thing Richard Caldwell couldn't resist, it was a spotlight. So when the local business league announced its annual charity gala, a red carpet event with press, sponsors, and a live-streamed auction, I knew he wouldn't pass it up. It was the perfect opportunity for him to reclaim his narrative. Dress up. Smile wide. Shake hands. Pretend none of the headlines had teeth. And that's exactly why I chose that night. The plan was precise. James secured court approval to publicly release the deposition excerpts and the full wellness investigation results. My mother gave permission for one photo to be shown, just one, the image Clara had taken of her in the rain, barefoot, blank-faced, standing outside the house where she no longer felt human. We paired it with a line from her diary, "I don't know who I am in here anymore. I think he's slowly turning me into a ghost." The image would be revealed on screen during the gala. But not by us. By the Women's Safety Council, a non-profit that Richard's firm used to sponsor. Unbeknownst to him, they had pulled his name from the donor list months ago. They agreed to share the materials, anonymously sourced, legally cleared, as part of their opening segment on psychological abuse. I wasn't in the ballroom that night. But I didn't need to be. I watched the livestream from my living room, my mother beside me. We didn't speak. We didn't touch. We just watched. The camera panned across the audience, tuxedos, glittering gowns, flutes of champagne. And there he was, Richard, standing near the stage, chatting with a local developer, his face smug, his eyes scanning for cameras. He had no idea. The councilwoman took the mic tonight. "Before we begin, we want to take a moment to honor survivors of coercive control. This is what it looks like." The screen behind her lit up. The photo appeared. Gasps. One woman in the crowd covered her mouth. Another stood. And then the text, "He told me I was safe. He said I was overreacting. He said I was lucky he stayed. But now, I am free." Richard turned. Saw the photo. And froze. The camera caught it all, his face draining of color, his jaw tightening. He didn't move. He didn't speak. Until the murmur turned to a buzz. Until the woman next to him stepped away. Until the sponsor beside him turned his back. And that's when he walked out. Not stormed. Not exploded. He walked. Slowly. Head down. A man who just realized the room he thought loved him had already made up its mind. My mother exhaled beside me. "That was the suit he wore when we got married," she whispered. I didn't respond. Because I was watching it happen in real time, the downfall. The shift. The moment where lies failed and truth stood up in a red dress and heels and said, "You can't bury me anymore." Later that night, my phone buzzed. It was a private message from an anonymous account. Just 6 words, "I should have left him too." He wasn't just exposed. He was remembered. And when victims start remembering out loud, predators start running. It wasn't a courtroom. Not yet. But it was close. A deposition room in the county law office, glass walls, a long conference table, a court reporter in the corner with her fingers poised over the keys. Richard sat across from us in a pressed navy suit, trying to look collected. But he couldn't keep his hands still. Every few minutes, He rubbed his thumb against his index finger like he was trying to erase something only he could feel. My mother sat to my left. Her hand brushed mine, barely. She wore a cream blouse and no makeup. No pretense. Just truth. And that was stronger than any armor Richard had ever worn. The attorney across the table began the questions, civil, controlled, precise. Not to provoke. Just to expose. It wasn't about fireworks. It was about facts. Mr. Caldwell, when did you first begin a romantic relationship with Elaine Harper? He cleared his throat. After my divorce. Are you certain? Yes. The attorney nodded, then turned to the court reporter. Please mark Exhibit 3. It was a scanned diary entry. My mother's handwriting, dated 8 months before the divorce was finalized. We'd waited to use it, waited until he was under oath. Richard stiffened. His lawyer leaned over and whispered something. He shook his head. I must have misremembered, he said, voice tight. Next came the emails, archived texts from my old number to my mother, during the years I was still married. Messages where I'd asked for advice. Begged for support. Cried about Richard's coldness. Each one was met with sympathy. Comfort. Lies. Then the final blow, the voicemail. James had warned me we might not be allowed to play it in court, but in a deposition, it was admissible. The room fell silent as the voice played, Richard's voice, you think you've won, don't you? But this isn't over. You're destroying your own mother. For what? Revenge? You always were jealous. Of me. Of her. Of everything. His lawyer didn't even object. She just closed her folder and stared ahead. The attorney nodded. Let the record reflect that Mr. Caldwell admits to referencing emotional conflict and acknowledges intent to intimidate the petitioner's daughter, who is acting on her behalf. Then came the moment I didn't expect. My mother asked to speak. No one stopped her. She looked Richard in the eye and said, with more steadiness than I had ever seen, I didn't marry you because I loved you. I married you because I didn't know how to be alone. But I'd rather die alone than ever return to the life you gave me. He didn't reply. Because he couldn't. Because the version of her he'd controlled was gone. And the woman sitting across from him now? Was untouchable. The deposition ended without drama. No shouting. No chairs thrown. Just the quiet, undeniable sound of a man who realized every mask had slipped. Every lie had been recorded. Every bruise had been believed. Outside the building, my mother and I stood in the sunlight. She tilted her face toward the warmth. I never thought I'd feel air like this again, she said. You're free now, I whispered. She smiled. No, she said. I'm finally alive. You don't take down a man like Richard Caldwell with anger alone. You do it with paperwork. With facts. With quiet, relentless truth. That's what James kept saying as we prepared to move from protection orders to full civil litigation. But even he didn't expect what we found next. It began with a routine financial disclosure, required for the court, nothing flashy. My mother had agreed to hand over every document tied to her estate, so we could separate what was hers before the marriage and what Richard might try to claim. But buried in one of the older portfolios was a savings account she didn't remember opening. It had her name. But not her signature. The balance? $178,000. And the deposits? All made by Richard. Monthly. Quiet. Over 5 years. James and I stared at the printout like it was a crime scene photo. This isn't hers, I said. No, James muttered. But he made it look like it was. When we asked my mother, she went pale. I've never seen that account before, she said. He always handled the paperwork. Told me it was too stressful to worry about money. We dug deeper. The account was tied to a P.O. box in his name, one my mother never had a key for. The withdrawals? Small. Regular. Almost as if he was siphoning money from her estate to another shell, but keeping it close enough to claim it was for her. But why? James explained it clearly, he was preparing for her death. If something had happened to her, this account would have transferred to him without probate. No questions asked. It wasn't just control. It was preparation. He had built a quiet financial grave and hoped no one would ever dig. That was the final twist. The moment everything turned from psychological abuse to premeditated exploitation. The court fast-tracked our case. A judge reviewed the account and froze it immediately. Civil fraud charges were filed by Friday. By Monday, Richard's face was splashed across every local news site, not as a controversial husband or former official, but as a financial predator. And the whispers returned. Only this time, they weren't questioning me. They were questioning him. His law license? Suspended pending review. His assets? Frozen until the hearing. His friends? Gone. He had gone from man about town to pariah in the span of 2 months. But the collapse wasn't finished. That night, I got another message. This time, from someone I had heard of. Carolyn Ashford. Richard's first wife. The one he always claimed had run off with the neighbor. She hadn't. She had run away from him. And now? She was ready to talk. Carolyn Ashford had disappeared from our town 20 years ago. No goodbye party, no divorce announcement, just gone. I was only beginning to date Richard back then, and I believed every word he told me. She was unstable. She cheated. She couldn't handle marriage. But the truth, like everything Richard touched, had been rewritten by his charm and buried under silence. Now, Carolyn was 61, living 2 states away, remarried, and finally, ready to talk. She drove down herself, arriving at James's office in a plain white sedan with her jaw clenched tight and a folder in her lap. She didn't cry. She didn't rage. She just sat in the conference room with me and my mother and told the truth, slowly, like she was brushing dust off old wounds. He liked to play savior, she said. At first, it felt like rescue. Then, like prison. She described the same patterns, isolating her from friends. Insisting on managing her money. Telling her she was lucky he stayed. Accusing her of being unstable if she disagreed. I once woke up and found all my journals gone, she said. He said he'd thrown them out because they made me too emotional. I still don't know what he did with them. Then she pulled out her folder. Photos. Emails. Letters she'd written herself but never sent, dated, signed, raw. They matched everything my mother had said. Everything I had endured. Only hers happened 2 decades earlier. And just like me, no one had believed her. She left in the night. Took a teaching job in another state. Changed her number. Changed her name. I thought if I stayed silent, I'd be safe, she said. But silence doesn't protect anyone. It just lets men like him grow roots. Her testimony, written and notarized, was submitted to the court that same afternoon. The judge reviewed it, then added it to the fraud case. Now it wasn't just psychological abuse. Or financial manipulation. It was a pattern of behavior. A history of cruelty. A long thread of women who had each been slowly, methodically erased. The media seized it. This wasn't just a scandal anymore. It was a fall from grace. The next week, Richard was served with a full restraining order and a court summons for civil damages exceeding $450,000. His attorney resigned. His country club revoked his membership. His house, my mother's old home, was listed for foreclosure. And me? I received a letter. No return address. Just my name. Inside, a single piece of paper. Scrawled in Richard's handwriting, "You win." No signature. No apology. Because even in defeat, he couldn't say the words out loud. But he didn't need to. Because I had won. My mother had survived. The world had seen him for what he truly was. And for once, the story didn't end in silence. Before I begin this final part of the story, if you've stayed with me all this way, please like, share, and subscribe my channel. And tell me in the comments, where are you from, and have you ever been called something you weren't, just to keep someone else's lie alive? I'd love to hear your story, too. They called me jealous. That was the name they gave me when I didn't clap at their wedding. When I didn't post a congratulations on Facebook. When I sat silent in a courtroom and dared to bring evidence instead of tears. They said I was bitter, unstable, hysterical. But when the final ruling came in, when the judge granted my mother full control of her estate, when Richard's accounts were frozen, and the civil judgment against him passed, it was my name they had to write on the file as the plaintiff's representative. Not jealous. Just right. Richard Caldwell was ordered to pay damages, barred from contacting my mother for 10 years, and labeled, quietly, but permanently, as unfit for guardianship, financial responsibility, or spousal power of attorney in any future marriage. The official note read, "Pattern of coercion and psychological abuse confirmed through multiple sources." My mother stood beside me when the paperwork was finalized. Her hands no longer trembled. Her hair had grown out, her voice steadied, and the bruises, both on her skin and in her memory, had started to fade. She didn't smile much. But when she did, it came from someplace real. She sold the house. Donated every last thing Richard had ever touched. The piano, the furniture, the pearl brooch he once bought her to wear at their wedding, all gone. She bought herself a small cabin just outside of town. A porch swing. A garden. No security system. No man to manage her mail. "I think I'll write again," she told me one afternoon, sipping tea on her deck. Not just diaries. Real stories. Ones where women leave before the monster wins. I asked her what she'd call the first one. She looked at me, eyes glowing like they used to when I was a child. "Jealous," she said with a smirk. "And then I'll show them why I never was." The next week, I got a message from Carolyn, the first wife. She had printed a copy of the judgment. Framed it. Put it on her bookshelf. For the women who weren't believed, she wrote. "Sometimes justice doesn't come all at once. Sometimes it crawls through the cracks in a lie, until the whole thing collapses. And when it does, you don't just get freedom. You get your name back. Not jealous. Not crazy. Just right." The end. If this story moved you, please remember to like, share, and subscribe my channel. And let me know, where are you from? Has someone ever twisted your truth and tried to silence your story? Your voice matters here.